forested, swampy areas they preferred.
James, the coyotes that you've had them investigate in Yorktown, were they in backyards, walking down streets?
Typically, they're crossing through backyards. A lot of times, just like we're discussing, that they do travel the power lines. A lot of times, the residents that I'm sent to do abut power lines and various other municipal services where they do have a large area that they can travel through. And that's a lot of times the case, is that that's where they are most commonly, is in the backyards, just behind the houses and wooded areas. Being that coyotes like to be secretive and they're, move through the area, that's a lot of times where we'll see them.
Do they travel in packs, or are they solitary animals?
There can be both. They've seen both pack-oriented activity, which we think most often is family groups, and solitary animals. And you'll also see breeding pairs. Occasionally, pairs will stay together for a couple of years even, and so you'll see a pair of coyotes frequenting an area, but you will have solitary individuals in those family units as well.
Is the so you have a male and a female, and what I don't know, they call the babies, or whatever they're called, pups.
Pups, we can call them pups.
Mm-hmm. It's actually this whole social behavior on coyotes. We could have a whole show on that alone, because it's really quite variable.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, that's one of the characteristics of coyotes and why they're so successful. They are amazingly adaptable. They're adaptable in their social life. They're adaptable in the size of the home range they need. They're adaptable in what they eat over and over. But it seems to be, at least around here, the impression is that most of what we see are pairs of coyotes and they're young. And the young disperse either in the fall or about January, February. So when you see a pack of coyotes, probably it's these family groups. And there's no rules, though, because there's also individual coyotes that we call transients. Yeah. And they don't seem to settle down. The pairs settle down like into a home range. But these transients just seem to be going across the countryside. And it's often those animals, I think, that the public run into and creates conflict.
Are they dangerous?
Well,
that's up for debate. I would say that they could be. There's been incidences nationwide. In California, they've had a number of incidences where I think especially children have been bitten. There was a couple incidences in Buffalo, New York, where I believe 3 people were, they phrased it, nipped at over a period of about a month. That coyote was eventually removed and those incidences went away. But danger is in the eye of the beholder. Perceived danger is very different than real danger. And people see these fairly large dog-like animals as a true threat, when in reality, for the number of coyotes that we have statewide and nationwide, there's been relatively few incidences where people have been harmed by coyotes, and I don't think there's ever been anybody that's been killed by a coyote. So I'd say they're a little more benign than what people give them credit for.
James, in Yorktown, has there been a close encounter?
We've had interactions. We've had people that observe them, but we have not had any incidents where the public was in danger. A lot of times our incidents come from domestic pet issues. People that allow their cats to be outside, leaving unattended pets is essentially what causes our biggest problems.
Yeah, I think it sort of makes news if there's a coyote incident.
Right.
And I had a graduate student a couple years ago try to figure out how many we could find in newspaper stories over the last decade, and it was about 20 cases east of the Mississippi. But you got to keep that in perspective. So 20 cases east of the Mississippi in, say, a decade of coyote conflict where somebody was bit. But every day in a year, there's 43 million people that are bitten by dogs. Of that, 300,000 people will need to go to an emergency room. So that works out just about 1,000 people a day in this country go to the emergency room because of a dog bite. And the alarming thing to me is that about half those cases are children. So if you are concerned about your children, you should teach them to respect any wild animal, and you can get hurt from any wild animal.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But really, it's much more likely that a child in Yorktown is going to be bitten and hurt by a dog than a coyote. But the more we can learn about how to observe them so that when there is an incident you can avoid it, the better off we'll be. And that way we can have coyotes living with us, and they do have an important ecological role in maintaining the balance of nature.
And not only the more we learn, but also things like this and getting that information out to the public so that they're more aware, so that maybe we can assuage some of the fears that are out there about living with coyotes and other wildlife that people encounter in Westchester and other parts of the state.
Well, I'll tell you what's really scary about coyotes is really the sounds they make.
Absolutely.
So,
It's eerie.
so I happen to have a tape of one, which I
How
got
convenient.
off the internet. So hopefully we can hear it. Let's see. I'll put up some.
Wow.
So,
Well,
what do you make of those sounds?
the funny thing is that sound right there is probably what triggers most of the calls that we get about coyotes at our wildlife office in New Paltz. It's people that hear them in woodlots adjacent to their homes. You know, where I live up in the Catskills, we don't hear coyotes that often. They're up in the mountainous areas, and they don't come around homes as often. They don't have to be around people as often as they do in these environments where they're kind of thrust into that landscape, either through dispersal or whatever reason that they're in these situations where they're around people as often as they are. But it's just that sound that triggers that fear in people that kind of makes them call us and say, you know, I heard coyotes and I'm worried about my pets, worried about my children. And to a degree, I mean, worried about pets that's a pretty realistic fear, because territorial coyotes will kill dogs. Coyotes are very opportunistic predators, and they will kill cats as a prey item. So some of those fears are realistic. Fears about small children. I mean, children to a coyote, I'm not sure if they would view it as a prey item, but I would be careful with my children, not leave them unattended. Certainly I wouldn't do that in any situation. Would I leave an infant unattended? But, you know, if I know that I live with wildlife that had the potential to be dangerous, I would take extra cautions.
I think really teaching the children at a young age to respect wildlife and to, you know, observe them from a distance and appreciate them from a distance, and not try and interact with them, not try and feed them, you know, and get that basic message out there that, you know, they do live here and there's really nothing that we're going to be able to do about it. We have to find a way to coexist, and really just having the knowledge as to what these animals are doing, I think, is the key.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And from T-Town's perspective and my perspective, you know, it's not only that we sort of have to find a way to live with them, but it's that we should want to find a way to live with them. It's actually a good thing to have a predator like a coyote in our ecosystem, in the way our system here in Yorktown and Northern Westchester works. The predator has a function in maintaining ecological health, which ultimately connects to human health and human well-being, and, you know, even our economic system. Ultimately, if you don't have sufficient nature, it will all fall apart. So education is key, as James said and Kevin have said, and I think that finding a way for all the different aspects of nature to live with us is ultimately what's going to keep us all healthy.
You mentioned that the coyote is on top of the food chain, or it's one of the top predators.
Mm-hmm.
Who's above a coyote?
We are.
We are.
Coyotes, like your family dog, lives about 15 years. Coyotes, in theory, or in captivity, could live about 15 years. But you know, it's a difficult life being a coyote. The average, if you're lucky enough to see a coyote in Yorktown, it's probably 1 to 3 years old. Very few coyotes live longer than 3 years. And what kills them? People shoot them, and they're hit by cars.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the main reasons in New York why or they starve to death. So coyotes are short-lived, and who do they kill or predate? A whole series of animals, from deer. They help maintain deer. They're insufficient to maintain the number, and we have way too many deer in Yorktown and Westchester. It's hurting our forests. But they do predate on deer. They predate on raccoons, for example, and all kinds of small mammals.